and welcome to a new episode of He's Not Wrong. I'm your host, Chad D. And immigration policy has moved fast this year. So fast that it can be hard to tell which headline actually matters and what headline is noise. But today's guest is someone whose job for years was to know the difference. My guest is Andrea Flores, an attorney and immigration policy expert who previously served at the Department of Homeland Security and in the White House. She spent her career inside the making of immigration policy, which means that she understands how the decisions actually get made and where they're headed next. And there's a lot to get into because just recently, a new Department of Justice decision made clear that DACA recipients are not protected from deportation. And the Supreme Court agreed to take up the question of whether the administration properly revoked temporary protected status for Syrians and Haitians. There are signs that this administration may be shifting its approach, moving away from high-profile raids towards a more quieter, broader pressure campaign to drive people out. And even among conservatives, there's growing tension over whether enforcement is going far enough. Andrea's read on all of this is that these aren't isolated stories. Taken together, they represent the next phase of mass deportation, one that pairs expanded enforcement with a steady, systemic dismantling of the legal pathways that let people stay in this country. She writes about all of this in her Substack, Securing America's Promise, and today she's going to help us make sense of where things stand and where they're headed. So please, without further ado, welcome Andrea Flores. Welcome to He's Not Wrong. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm excited for this conversation because immigration is a topic that I feel like here in Alabama, here in the South, a lot of people, and we were talking about this before we started recording, but a lot of people I feel like know immigration only from the talking points that they hear in the news. And it's such a nuanced topic that it's really difficult to actually understand the issue that our immigration system is facing right now just by like 60, 90-second sound bites in the news.
hmm
And so I'm really excited for our conversation today. And the audience did have a bit of your resume read to them before we got to this part in our conversation. And so just with everything that you have worked on with immigration, everything you've seen with your work history, what is it that the cable news networks are missing on the topic of immigration?
Right now, the cable news networks are really failing to explain what your viewers are interested in, which is why hasn't Washington been able to fix such a big problem, right? Immigration is not new in the United States. We have always had it. And our system actually has a clear design. So I always say there's three reasons that the United States brings in immigrants, and that is to, perform in certain jobs, so employment-based immigration, we call it, for families to come, so immigrant family members to join their family in the United States, and then also humanitarian, we're a place of refuge. So we call it sort of the three pillars. But what you hear from the news is simply that this is an issue often that is divides Americans, is bad for the country, is controversial, is chaotic. I think sometimes what you miss is that the system has been functioning, and there are about 13% of the US population are immigrants. And they've been here, they're part of our community. I often feel like the media treats it as though immigrants happen to our community, but they're in our schools, restaurants, churches, like
Yes.
they're just part of us. And so it's part of the United States that we have this system. But that doesn't mean the system works well for Americans in our country right now. I mean, it definitely doesn't work well for immigrants. So I think it's such a controversial topic in the media that it often gets covered as it's always a problem. But really, there is design and thought that goes into the current system, even if it needs to be fixed.
It's crazy to me how the national conversation has shifted to immigration being this thing that's now viewed as a negative. There's such beauty in our culture. There's such beauty in the fact that America is a melting pot. And I know that's such a cliche, but it's true. It, the thing that makes America beautiful is how vastly different our people are. Um, and I feel like that's being lost right now in a lot of the conversation. And so anytime that I have the ability to kind of bring it back to the beauty and the fact that we are all so different and we come from other places and we bring our experiences, um, together as one, I'd like to take that opportunity. Um, I think it's grounding. But you grew
Hmm.
up in a border town, correct, in New Mexico?
Correct. Las Cruces, New Mexico.
Okay, so help me understand this because in Alabama, like we border Georgia, Mississippi, Tennessee, Florida, right? We'd we have a coast. We are far from any international border, but yet people here and people in the South think that like it is an issue for us when it's not. So what is the reality of living in a border city compared to what the talking points might be in the South?
Absolutely. So, I mean, this is one of the reasons I work on this issue is because I grew up in southern New Mexico, which is very close to El Paso, Texas, and to Ciudad Juarez. And so I grew up in a border region and it was really normal, right? It was
Mhm.
people crossing the border back and forth to go shopping and eat at restaurants. And yes, there's security checkpoints, but they're monitoring cars. And, I used to go and visit cousins in Mexico. It just is a region like every other in the United States.
Yeah.
But what I was fascinated by, especially after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, was how the border became this talking point in Washington and around the country. And how many people, and I think Republicans have been really smart at this, have made the border this symbol of why immigration is bad. Even when it's been quiet, even when we haven't had migration crises, it's been a very consistent talking
Yeah.
point, and I need people to realize there's a lot of money that goes into funding, media that says that the border's out of control and that migration's out of control and that these are dangerous communities, when we know cities like El Paso are some of the safest in the nation. Like, these are not unsafe communities because they're on the border.
It's I'm happy that you bring that up because I feel like obviously it's all intentional. There's a lot of money that's pumped into this messaging. That's not a secret, but it's almost intentional because these like people, and I always bring it back to Alabama because that's where I live. But it's like these
Mhm.
people in Alabama, they've never been to a border city. They've never lived in a town that is on the border of Mexico and Texas or in New Mexico. They don't know what that's like, and so they're gonna hear these things in the news and think that's true, or they hear these talking points on like right-wing extremist social media and think that's fact when the reality is they don't have this experience. They don't actually know what it's like to live in these towns.
They don't, but also one of my biggest critiques of Democrats on immigration is that they just don't talk about it and they don't talk about the facts, right? So you
Yeah.
have Republicans who go on the
Yep.
media every single day, no matter, I've been working in this field for 16 years, right? No matter what's been happening on the
Mhm.
ground, their talking points are that the border is out of control. They can't do immigration reform until the border is under control, and that's it. Whereas Democrats have had a lot of shifting answers, but lately they just don't answer at all. So I have sympathy for Americans who think our border is not secure. I have sympathy for their belief because that's the only thing they're hearing from their public leaders sometimes. They're not hearing that immigrants commit crimes at lower rates than native born Americans. They're not hearing the way it makes our economy stronger.
Yes.
They're not hearing any defense. And that's a huge problem.
I love critiquing the Democratic Party, the big D Democrat, because like in places like Alabama, right? And I'm sorry, I swear to God, I'll quit bringing like tying Alabama into this, but
You
but
don't
but
have
it
to.
le- but
That's right.
it, but it leads into a greater conversation of what the Democratic Party is failing to do. Because in Alabama, Democrats used to get elected at state level and federal level office as recent as 15 years ago. But the second that Republicans got a supermajority, they just the Democratic Party threw their hands up and said, "All right, bye." And it's like the second that they lose a fight, they just they don't continue to fight. They just walk away. And this is a perfect example of that. They're losing the conversation on immigration because they're just simply not talking about it. They're not talking about the facts, and they're not in the media in people's faces telling the truth about what's going on.
That's right. And I think when you look at what was a real border crisis under President Biden, you had the worst combination where you actually had. So people need to understand that after the COVID pandemic, There were 30% of the people in the entire Western Hemisphere were displaced, meaning they couldn't stay in their home country. So they were on the move, needed somewhere safe to go.
Mm.
That was a predictable crisis. So many of those people, as we saw, came to our borders. We were in an unprecedented migration emergency. So there was a real crisis at the border. But what you heard from the administration for 3 years, and I worked for them in the first year, was that it wasn't a crisis because they were treating it like a talking point, right?
Yeah.
They thought that if they actually acknowledged it was a crisis, that they would lose the issue. But what they needed to do was to be honest and say, here's the emergency, here's why it's happening, here's what we're doing about it. And instead, they let, once again, sort of a Republican, a very far right media machine fill in all those details. And it made it so that way Trump came in with much more support for what he is doing now, even though he's losing that support. But he came in mainly with a mandate on immigration.
So the next my next question it's twofold because you've made the
Mhm.
case that we're making the wrong case for immigration reform. So question one is what is the right case? But
Mhm.
question two is what can we learn from how Democrats approached immigration reform in 2024 and implement what you're about to tell me is the right case into what their plan is for 2028?
Yes. So let's maybe go back even a little further to when I was
Sure.
working under the Obama administration. And so the idea of immigration reform then was that Republicans said, well, if you secure the border, then we'll legalize the millions of undocumented immigrants living in the country and we'll make other changes to modernize the system. That is what immigration reform meant. And President Obama got close, right? He passed a bill in the Senate, he got through the filibuster, and then House Speaker John Boehner refused to bring it up, right? And I always say this is an important moment, right? Because sometimes we say the system is broken, but it is working for many corporate interests in this country
Yeah. Yeah.
who have relied on having undocumented immigrants never being legalized. Okay, so that's where we left. The last time Democrats had a clear message on immigration reform was under the Obama administration, because then Trump came in and he did really extreme things, not as extreme as now, but let's say the most extreme thing was intentionally taking children away from their families at the border. And then Democrats basically ran against him on everything on immigration. You know, they were just like, we're not that, but they didn't say what they were instead. And so the real challenge of the Biden administration is they didn't have a clear answer on the system. And honestly, it started to feel to me, as someone who had worked for Democrats, that they were defending a system that they had always said was broken. They were now sort of the defenders of it.
Yes.
And that was a profound strategic miss. And they also stopped talking about legalization, which is an issue that unites, especially Latino voters on both parties, right? They've been
Yeah.
waiting since the Reagan administration for an access to a path to citizenship, right? It was
Mm.
Democrats who promised it. You didn't really hear Biden talk about it ever. And
No.
so,
You
all
only heard
right,
them
so what
talk about it. It
is
was like right before the election. Was it what? The like summer before the election or less it was less than a year is when they finally admitted, okay, we have a problem, but it only seemed that way because
the
they were feeling the
election?
pressure. Yeah.
And that's so typical with Democrats on immigration. And I would say when they want to reach Latino voters more broadly, they do it at the last minute, right?
Yeah.
Even though we're super clear about what we support. And now I say the case that has to be made is not going back to saying, all right, we want to secure the border and path to citizenship and we're done, right? What does that matter to a voter in Alabama, for example? Like, what do they understand right now when cost of living is top of mind? Like, we need to do a better job, those of us who want to reform the system, making the case of why immigration makes Americans' lives better. Like, that's it. And so that doesn't mean you are, I think there's been debate in the movement about this saying, well, no, we need to talk about immigrants' rights of the immigrants themselves. And that's like the main argument. It's a moral argument. Or people say, let's just make the economic argument and say it helps our GDP. If I'm an American who's busy with my life, like I don't hear that as that means that if we reform the immigration system, a hospital in my community could stay open. Or that, that's not what I'm thinking, but that's what immigration reform could do. It means that you could maybe afford childcare because we
Mhm.
have an orderly system of making sure that in communities that are closing childcare centers, they actually match immigrants with those places, or in going to the hospital example, right? We can
Yeah.
predict right now where there will be hospital closures in rural America. They don't have to be, right? We can reform immigration and make it so we're matching immigrants to the communities who need them most. We need a refresh in the way we make the case to Americans because Trump has been very good at making a case that's based on emotion that immigration is bad for America and it's the cause of all our problems from housing to crime to national security, right? So if you're
Yeah.
not making an emotional case and appeal, then you're not competing, right? Like we're fighting on we're barely fighting, and then when we fight on very technical terms, and you can't, you know, compete against that emotion on the other side.
So I think from my experience, from my point of view, is that the emotion that Trump puts into these issues is he makes it very personal for people, but personal in a self-centered way. So you have this topic and it affects you personally negatively. And so then you have a negative emotion. You think Trump's going to fix it. He doesn't. He fails every single time. That's kind of the
Yes.
way it goes. But from what I'm hearing is like there needs to be emotion put back into this issue with Democrats, but it's more broad. How do we take this topic, bring the emotion back into it, and like how does it affect people on an individual basis? And I hate that I'm even asking that, but I'm like
Mhm.
right now that's people are so individualistic in how they vote and how they think and how they act. Like what's the through line there?
I think it's going to be a little different in each community. So let's take a community like Charlotte or Minneapolis, where they had thousands of federal agents, ICE, Border Patrol, storm their communities, force like thousands of children to stop going to school, businesses closed. If you're not there as a Democrat in those states, right, you have a very competitive Senate race in North Carolina, and you're not saying how you're fixing and making sure that never happens again, then you're not reaching that constituency on immigration, right? Like
Yeah.
Former Governor Cooper needs to like make the case about why making sure immigration enforcement never disrupts North Carolinians' lives that way. Same in Minnesota, right? I think the question that was really shocking to me was how many people in Minnesota we're realizing that they're immigrant neighbors, right? Because we have not updated legal options in the immigration system since before the internet was launched, right? That was the last time there were new legal options for immigrants created that they realized that there was nothing they could do to help protect their neighbors, right? Like they couldn't take them to a legal clinic to get protections. They couldn't defend them in any way. Their only option is deportation because that's the way our system works, right? Even for someone with a very simple immigration violation. And so when you think about making the case, it's different in every state. One of my favorite candidates right now is James Tallarico because of the case he's
Yes.
making is positive, factual, and emotional, right? He keeps saying immigration makes America richer and stronger, and we can secure our borders and still welcome people. That's it. That's all true. And he's giving us a symbol again, and I think that's really smart. And I think there's a congressman running in a really competitive race in my home district in New Mexico, Congressman Gabe Vasquez. He also is really refreshing the case. He just introduced a caregiver visa to bring in caregivers and communities that need them. And it's such a novel bill. And I'm going to get really nerdy for a second, right?
Get
Because
nerdy.
I'm going to get nerdy because this bill not only ensures that future caregivers have like a legal pathway and they don't eventually become undocumented or exploited by their employer, right? That's been a problem in the past with certain visas. He also is making the visa available to the currently undocumented caregivers who are already here. So he's giving that option for people to protect the caregivers that are already with their families. I mean, these are profound and emotional ways to sort of remind everybody what we talked about at the beginning. Like immigrants are already here, they're already part of our lives. Let's give them fair options to be here legally because the system really doesn't. It's not really designed to let people come in or stay in a legal status.
One thing that I'm happy you brought up is Minneapolis, because
Mhm.
after all of that went down earlier this year, Democrats seem to be holding their ground on not funding ICE or Customs Border Protection. They were holding their ground on not funding them until they got concessions as it relates to body cameras and limits on agents covering their faces, for example, judicial warrants. We just saw Trump sign the funding that they passed in Congress, the $70 billion to fund those two agencies, and Democrats walked away with very little. Was that a strategic failure on their part? Do you think they should have continued to hold their ground on that?
I don't think it was a strategic failure, but that's because I want to put you in the arc of where Democrats have been with Trump on immigration. If you look at the beginning of last year, right, Democrats were voting for a bill called Lake and Riley, which
Yep.
essentially required the mandatory detention of people who had not even been convicted of crimes, right? It actually reduces due process for immigrants. And they voted for that before Trump even took office, right?
Mm,
And you know why they did? Because of the Biden border crisis. They said, oh, like, what people must want is for us to crack down and be tough and be more like Trump, right? They didn't
yeah.
have their own vision on the system. And then when some horrible things happened last year, and this is what, I think this is important history, like when over 200 men from Venezuela who were here seeking refuge were shipped off to El Salvador to a prison so the United States could pay for them to be tortured in that prison. Democrats didn't want to fight on that, right? And it was interesting to see that. And then there were the deployments in Los Angeles where Latinos were just being swept up in
Yeah.
racial profiling. There was the Kavanaugh decision where Justice Kavanaugh, it was a concurrence, but the Supreme Court said that kind of racial profiling, we're not going to stop it. And then the Chicago deployments were devastating. And it really wasn't until Minneapolis when I saw finally Democrats say, you know what, we're going to fight this. And when Alex Preddy died, it was a sea change moment for Democrats on immigration. And they used all the leverage that they could. And it was, I want to remind people that it was stunning that Senator Thune, I used to work in the Senate, right? When you're in the majority, you have all the power. And the fact that Senator Thune even let them negotiate showed to me how Republicans were suddenly scared after Minneapolis because they had no reason to give them even that time to even shut down DHS, but they did. And now the devastating reality is that the way we fund, the way that Congress can fund is just it's inherently anti-democratic, right? Because
Yeah.
they can do it with a slim majority. There are no more tools that Democrats have. They fought for as long as they could. And now I want to warn people, if you think mass deportations have not impacted you yet, well, you've never seen a Department of Homeland Security with over 200 billions of dollars to implement them. Right? It's
Mm.
about to get so much worse than everything we have seen. And so I'm glad Democrats fought, but now it's about the election and it's about them drawing that contrast, and they have to talk about immigration to do that. And that will be the disappointment if they leave it off the table and they don't realize how much it's impacting. Communities in the South have some of the most what they call 287G agreements to allow local police to do immigration enforcement. The data is everywhere. And I think this administration did a big deployment in Minneapolis on purpose because everything after that looks de escalated. But
Yes.
we have to
Yes.
be smarter. We have to be smarter and say this is still happening and the fight continues.
It just makes me so mad that it took the death of Alex Preddy for that to be the line that Democrats were standing on. Like nothing before that, but that was the line. It took the death of someone for them to stand their ground. Um, what makes me mad, and I hope I think you'll agree with me on this, and it's my fear as we move into this election year, and it makes me mad when they do this on other topics. But it's like the Republicans are so extreme on the immigration front right now with the mass deportations and ICE and everything that we've seen, that when we negotiate, we're just moving further to the center on this. And then they move more extreme to the right. And then we have to go more to the center. And it's like, why are we doing that? Why can't we just, why are we the ones always having to capitulate and sacrifice our values and where we stand on something to move closer to the center to chase Republicans?
This is my favorite topic because I started a Substack basically just to tackle this issue, which is the fact that the politics of immigration are Republicans getting everything they want And
Yes.
Democrats in my entire career were dropping our priorities like one after the other. And nowhere more so was that clear than when President Biden did finally go to Congress and said, I want to help fix the border. And then, you know what he didn't even mention? He didn't mention the dreamers, the children brought to United States when they were children who are still undocumented, that Democrats have been fighting for since 2001, right? Like the fact that you're dropping in a negotiation one of your most popular
Yeah.
priorities, we don't know how to fight on this issue. So I just
Yeah.
wrote a piece that was, reminding people that we can't keep doing the moving to the center thing because Trump has implemented things as extreme as an office of remigration. Remigration means ethnic cleansing, and remigration in today's context means mass deportation. So, how are we going to move closer to them on the idea that we have to deport as many sort of brown, black, Asian people from the country as possible? That is their open agenda. Like, that's not hyperbolic. That's just what they want. And so we have to think about the case we're making without just reflexively moving closer to them.
You mentioned that Minneapolis was so extreme with the deployment of ICE. So we have like this really extreme event in our head. So everything after that seems de-escalated. And you said it's going to get
Hmm.
really, really bad. Explain for me. It's one thing to say it's going to get really bad, but what does that actually look like in our communities? What do we need to be looking out for? What do we need to be aware of? What does a de-escalated, really bad situation look like? And I use the word de-escalated very
Hmm.
loosely
Hmm.
because you know what I mean. But what do we need to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, so like let's take the last month alone. So a lot of what they're doing, and I'm an attorney, so some of this is just sometimes they fight on very technical terms, but they are, the Department of Justice, the Bureau of Immigration Appeals recently released a decision that said that if you have DACA, that is no longer an automatic defense to your deportation, right? So they secured that legal decision, meaning that DACA recipients, those who are dreamers, qualified under the Obama program, have been protected since 2012, can now be deported. That is a huge change, right? So those are people, they're my age. DACA recipients are not young anymore. They're like elder millennials. And those are people in our communities who will start disappearing. Then you have people who are asylum seekers or going through the immigration court system. So a lot of people may have seen, and maybe they haven't, but immigrants going to their court hearings and then being taken away, right? So they're using the legal immigration system. So think about if you go to the DMV. Imagine going to the DMV and following all the rules and losing your license. I mean, that is what is happening to immigrants around the country right now. So it's becoming a little quieter and out of sight, but numerically, it's going to start being felt at a much bigger rate. And the thing I am most scared about is coming up at the end of this month, probably, which is that President Trump, there is a program called Temporary Protected Status. There are well over 1 million people who have it. They have work permits, they've been vetted, they have a legal status to be here. He wants to unilaterally terminate their protections, and it seems likely that the Supreme Court will allow him to. And so we're going to go over a cliff where we could all of a sudden have an additional 1 million people who are undocumented.
Yeah.
And that is stunning. And then that means that's 1 million people who could be rounded up by ICE and the Border Patrol in
Yeah.
communities. And I was just reading a story. People think this is only happening in blue cities. It's not. Like the highest arrests are in Florida and Texas right now
Yeah.
because they have their state and local police doing arrests, but they also have like their fish and wildlife services. Like you have families going to parks and being whisked away by officers of the state who are helping ICE. Like it's going to feel more secret, like almost like a secret police in a lot of these places. Places it's like an open federal police force, and other places it's like a secret police. So people need to understand if you are an immigrant, even if you're a naturalized immigrant, they are going after everyone. Like
Yeah.
it's stunning.
Explain to me what's going on right now with the naturalized citizens, because I feel like we're at this like inflection point. We're always at an inflection point, but I specifically where we're at this point where you see Trump really doubling down on trying to uh, eh, denaturalize citizens, and that is that even like a I don't even think that's a thing, right? Like you can't just like denaturalize like someone, but yet they're trying to do it. They're trying to challenge the constitutionality of people who like with birthright citizenship. There are all these things that are happening right now in our courts that we've never seen play out before. And it's the fact that they're even trying to go to these lengths to get people out of our country.
Mhm.
What like where does this go? How does this end? And you're a lawyer, like I'm just curious the legality around this because I'm like, like does anything stand anymore?
It's a good question with the Supreme Court because we saw what they did with voting rights, in which they gutted the voting rights statute and tried
Yeah.
to change that it actually is meant to protect past racial discrimination. And, and I think about I'm friends with Congressman Shamari Figueres, like
The
he's lost his
he,
seat,
I'm from Montgomery,
essentially.
Alabama, so like that it hits very close to home. He's my family's
Yeah.
congressman, so
Exactly, like and so that the Supreme Court on issues of race, on issues of immigration, they're very extreme, right? So I think hopefully there so Trump, one of his first actions, and you know what really annoys me is when people always say, "Oh, it's just his aide Stephen Miller," or it's just his team that's anti-immigrant. Trump has taken a fringed white supremacist anti-immigrant movement that came out of the civil rights movement and given it power in the White House. And he did that with, for example, the birthright
mm,
citizenship order, right, which is to try and rewrite the Constitution with the stroke of a pen, right? That's not how you amend the Constitution. So and ensure that we have stateless babies, undocumented babies, that anyone who is waiting for their green card, if they happen to have a baby, they have an undocumented child, right? Like it's an absurd order. And I think the Supreme Court will strike that down because it is so blatant that the president cannot change the actual text of the Constitution. Or else, can you imagine, like Democrats would have done voting rights or Roe v. Wade, right? Like if that was that easy, everyone would do it. But to your point, he loves to test limits. But
but
uh,
let me push
yeah.
back on that a little bit because even with the Supreme Court, with what we're seeing right now, they're going against precedent that they set just years ago, especially with the redistricting in places like Alabama. So like how can you confidently say, and I hate pushing back
Hmm.
on guests like this, but like I think it's so
No,
important.
push back. Yeah.
How can you confidently say like you don't think the Supreme Court's going to allow this when I think they are the most rogue body of public officials like ever right now. Like
Yes. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you exactly why, because I think Chief Justice Roberts always does this thing where he likes to do something that feels like really institutionalist and legal for the lawyers, right? To say like the court still has credibility, right? That he did this with the DACA case, right? A lot of people
yeah.
thought we would lose in 2020. I thought we would lose in 2020. And he skirted a line, right? Because he knew that if 1 million DACA recipients were suddenly, thrown into limbo, that was such a popular program. He didn't want the court to be on that side. And birthright citizenship compared to, right? He likes to pair cases, like one where he can feel like the court's legitimate and one where he can do something really extreme. And I
Yeah.
fear that the birthright citizenship will be the one that is a win and seen as like, well, of course the Supreme Court wouldn't let Trump do that. And then he'll do legalized 1 million people. Right. So I always see these in combination,
Mm,
right? What gives him permission to uphold precedent, and then what also gives him permission to like destroy people's lives, right? Because that's what it is. Like it
yeah.
is just. I'm totally with you that this court is rogue, but there's a strategy to their rogueness, and
Mm,
um, Chief Justice Roberts really seems to care about the legitimacy still of the court, even though, I mean, look, this to me, he lost me in Shelby County when he said that racism was essentially fixed and the Voting Rights Act back then was no longer needed in the same way. And so, uh, but this, I always, when I talk to Democrats a lot, I brief a lot of members and I say, this is now your governing problem, right? Like,
yeah.
if we have more undocumented immigrants, what is your plan? for when you have power to make this a major part of the fight.
What is their response when you say that to them?
I think fear, because we're living in the just the lessons of the Biden admin. And I fear that, okay, in Washington, I'm curious if you've heard these, like they blame Biden's failures on like immigration groups in the left. And they're even like, columnists like Matthew Iglesias, he blamed woke Latino staffers in the administration, which is a Latino staffer in the administration. I take issue with that. And what was so funny about that is I was like, why is everyone with so much power blaming everyone except the people who held power, right? And because they have that narrative, now Democrats think, well, we should be as tough as possible, right? I'm in conversations where people offer that maybe we should keep the same amount of DHS funding, or maybe we should remove as many people. And I think that's just absurd, right? Like, and Minneapolis was a lesson to those people post Biden who thought Americans were done with immigration, because that was not, it's not a Los Angeles, right? It's not a Chicago. It is a majority white community where people were standing out in zero temperatures, defending construction workers trapped on a roof when ICE was trying to get to them. Like, if you had asked someone in DC, would that happen? They would have said, no, Americans wouldn't care to help them. And so I think immigration reform and the answers are really going to come from communities like Minneapolis right now, because
Mhm.
they're saying, no, we're Americans. This is actually what we want for our immigrant neighbors. Like, you're actually wrong in Washington right now that we all dislike immigrants. And I think we're in for a reckoning as a party to kind of cut from what Biden did and what happened and move into the future.
I I spot on. I really do think we're at this point where the party is gonna come to a reckoning on a lot of things, because they think they know what's best, but what they're missing and what they're failing to recognize is like the people are out there every single day telling them what they care about, and they're just
Every
not
day.
being heard every day. For example, I know this has nothing to do with immigration, but it is just something I've been covering on social media, because I always say like the algorithm has decided I'm going to be the spokesperson for this issue. Like I can talk about
Yeah, I love
anything,
that.
and then the algorithm just decides, nah, you're going to talk about this. So I've been talking about data centers, right? They
Hmm.
big issue in Alabama. People are showing up and speaking out about data centers in such massive numbers that they are overflowing the spaces where these meetings are being held, with lines wrapping around a building. It is insane, the response that the general public is giving in opposition to data centers, but yet our elected officials just refuse to even listen to them about their concerns, and they're still going ahead and rubber stamping all of these corporations plans to put these data centers in neighborhoods, next to schools, next to humane societies, next to zoos. What we're seeing is a lack of regulation. There is literally no regulation for data centers in places like Alabama, the South. I know most places across the United States, and they're trying to take advantage of that lack of regulation. So Birmingham City Council just, and I swear to God, I have a point. Birmingham City Council just
Oh,
passed
yeah.
an ordinance that was really weak on regulating data centers that are planned after the ordinance is passed. So it has nothing to do with data centers that
Mm.
they're already allowing, but the mayor, who's Democratic, Randall Woodfin, and then the city council, who's majority Democratic, are out there going, "This is the strongest regulation that in the South on data centers." I'm like, it's the only regulation on data centers in the South. So like, of course it's gonna, you can say it's the strongest. And they're still failing to even acknowledge, okay, we should have not passed this ordinance. We should have listened to the hundreds of people who showed up, gone to the room, the back room, reworked the ordinance, put in feedback, and then like presented it to the public. I'm fearful now that these Democrats who run our city government, they're
Mhm.
gonna get voted out on this issue. And they just, like, our elected officials just don't understand or see that people are like awake, they're aware, they're mobilized, and they're organizing. And I don't know what else to do to like bring attention to the fact to our elected representatives, our elected officials, that like you need to be listening to the people. They're giving you the answers right now.
Yes. The answers are there, and that resonates so much because, I think there's this fight for the future of the Democratic Party. And to me, what Bernie Sanders has done, what AOC is doing, I mean, I think of her holding the water impacted by data centers like up for TV cameras, using her platform.
Yes.
I mean, that is what fighting looks like in today's age. And I think that's so inspiring. And I know people get so they're like, oh no, but the party must move to the center because America's in the center. I'm like, what does that mean? Because that means you have to ignore the
Yes.
leaders who are connecting with the people right now, or you have to pretend that they don't have as much power. And to your point, like on immigration, both times I've been to the No Kings protests, I have been shocked by how many immigration signs there are. And then my feeling is that the Democratic Party hasn't like received that energy and said, okay, people are marching in the streets on this. Like, we need a plan. Like, we need a plan that is not just opposing Trump. Like, let's take the family detention fight. Like, that needs to be a bigger fight. Like, I want to see Congressman Joaquin Castro is actually doing a great job. He like keeps going down there. He keeps talking about families. There should be no children in detention centers in the United States of
No.
America. And that is something we've known since the Obama administration when they tried it. Doctors have been very clear. This is an easy fight, I think, for Democrats right now. And to your point, what will it take? It's like it takes a lot more physical showing up. I mean, I want Democrats to be like outside of those centers and just being like, shut it down. And I think people would resonate and organize with them. And I will say one thing sitting in Washington is that I do wish that we got back to a model where people would fly in from states like Alabama again and just like show up at the offices, right? Like force the members to talk. I think some of that real retail political strategy would be welcome again because there's something about the
Mm.
post-COVID world where a Zoom constituent meeting is not the same.
No, no.
And that someone as I worked as a Senate staff and I remember feeling the difference like when I think people should sit in people's offices. I think they should do peaceful, demonstrations that show exactly to your point what Americans care about right now.
My brain is going like 90 miles an hour right now thinking about ideas to show how easy it is to hold your representative accountable by going to places like DC. We'll be talking on that front. Hey,
Okay,
Did you see
excellent.
Miss Rachel on Capitol Hill? I believe it was
I did.
yesterday.
I mean, can we talk about someone who's been fighting a consistent moral fight and
My God.
incredible, incredible.
I was
And
going
even
through the Go ahead.
yeah, sorry. I was just saying, like, more, even more than any immigration group I know, like, she used her platform and is making people look at the fact that America is incarcerating children. So I just thought it was incredible.
To everyone who's listening, if they have, or if you have not gone and looked at Miss Rachel's social media, gone and looked at the news about what she was doing on Capitol Hill, she had a hearing, or did she just, was it like, was she just meeting with representatives? What was she there for exactly?
She was dropping off letters from children
That's
and,
right.
yeah, and making them see the words of the children themselves.
Because I was going through the packet that she was giving to representatives and to senators, and that was the most impactful, moving argument that I have seen made yet. No, like I don't want to like do a disservice to everyone who's being an advocate on the immigration front. But speaking of emotion, speaking of children, speaking of the impacts, having her share stories directly from kids who are in detention centers, hearing it from their perspective was so moving and powerful. I do not understand how anyone can read those letters and not see the problem.
That's right. And I don't understand why it isn't a promise on every flyer for every Democrat running that they will close family detention. We don't need it. I'm a
No.
lawyer. We can enforce immigration law without it. And that's a great example of like something I'll tell a member, like that is clearly what you should be fighting on. But this goes to like, we're in a moment, like I said, the solutions are coming outside of DC. And I think that's great. I came of age in DC and learned how to do work here. And I became disillusioned myself, right, with some of those tools. And it's why I think going anywhere to talk about immigration is one of the most important things I can do right now.
Yeah.
Because I know that our public leaders won't. And so it's sort of part of my own advocacy and theory of change as well.
So I'm from a Catholic military conservative Southern family, right? I'm a blue dot in a very red sea. And you change minds by having these conversations at the dinner table and having open and honest discussions. I sit down with my family and I want to talk about this. What are some of the points? What are some of the areas that I need to hit on in my conversation? And how do I bring it up to get them to understand that this is an issue? That dinner table conversation, if you will.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the way I approach any audience, right, is that I lead with what I know they care about the most. So I would say I know I can tell when someone is worried that I don't value border security or that I might think that that we should open the borders and let everybody in, right?
Yeah.
So you have to kind of make people feel comfortable to have the conversation, right? So, maybe for your family, the thing is, I think our laws should be enforced and we shouldn't be letting everyone around the world who wants to come in come in. But let's look at the ways that we benefit from immigration in our own state, right? Like you can point to, we would have a bigger nursing shortage for us if we didn't have immigrants here. Like we would have fewer jobs created in the United States if we had shut off immigration every time Trump wanted to. I always actually talk about the COVID recovery. We would have been far worse off as a country if we hadn't increased immigration right after the pandemic, because every country around the world who didn't had a slower economic recovery. So I think it's reminding, like,
Mm,
immigrants have always been our economic engine, and we have not
yes.
always appreciated them. And so I don't need, you can just end the argument on the first point. Like they've always been our economic engine. They are part of America's kind of competitive edge. And also, our systems vet them. Like we prioritize public safety. You cannot get immigration benefits if you've committed certain crimes. Like that's all part of the system. Those are lies, right? The Republicans say all of the
Yeah.
time. And I meant to answer more on denaturalizations because I think this might be something that resonates with people. The United States is so unique that when you are a US citizen, that is what you are. You are not, if you are in France and you become naturalized, you're still like an American who became French, or you still uh, are governed in some countries differently. There's two tiers of citizenship. There is only one tier of American citizenship. And we believe that if immigrants go through all the steps, they can access that. But Trump wants us to divide that and to have multi tiers of who gets to be American and completely redefine that. And I think Americans should be angry about that because to be American, to be at a naturalization ceremony, especially, my grandfather was a World War II veteran who never got his citizenship.
Mm,
And I think that's really anti American, right? I think most
yeah.
Americans would say if you fought for our country, you should be a citizen. And what denaturalizations are doing is they're trying to use a very discrete law and say, because here's the reality: once you're an American citizen, you are also held to the same laws, right? If you're a naturalized citizen and you commit a crime, you are held to the same laws as any American citizen. But they've picked all these cases where they're trying to say that if you've committed a crime, then you no longer even get to be an American citizen. That has never been how it works, right?
No.
Denaturalizations, you have to prove a really specific lie in your application process that you committed, and it's been so rare. It's been in the single digits for most administrations, and now they wanna do hundreds a month.
Well, let me just, I want to point this out. I apologize if it looked like I was doing something else, but I just wanted to fact check myself before I spoke on this. Because naturalization is in the Constitution. It is a constitutional right. And you have the party of the Constitution who is actively going against the United States Constitution.
Yes.
And it is mind blowing to me that they have this chokehold on the branding, on the messaging, on the talking point that we're the party of law and order, that we're constitutionalists, when their very existence at this point, if they believe in what Trump is saying on this topic of immigration, is anti-American. It literally is anti-American. It goes against our Constitution. It blows my mind that anyone can stand for that. But I appreciate what you were saying about the talking points around the kitchen table, because especially in the South, so many people are so focused on the economy. They're not focused on social issues. They're not focused on other people. As we said earlier in our conversation, they're very individualistic, but pointing to the fact that, like, in Alabama, we have hospitals closing in rural
Mhm.
communities. We have a nurse and doctor shortage. We have a hospital in Montgomery, Alabama that's closing, and 71,000 patients are about to be without care. And
Wow.
the fact that you can draw a clear line of, like, the care that you get can be, and the quality of it can be drawn directly, and it correlates with immigration, is brilliant. That is so perfect that I
Oh,
cannot
good, because
believe.
yeah. I'm testing it, you know, we need new arguments. Like, we're a
Yes.
movement that is in need of new arguments.
Yes, absolutely. The fact that you can tie it in with the economy, the fact that you can tie it in with your medical care. I mean, brilliant.
Yeah. And I think reminding Americans that, I mean, it makes me patriotic. If you go watch a naturalization ceremony, and that can be one of the most patriotic things you do, because you just see, like, the beauty of, and the how happy people are. I mean, look, I used to work on border issues, and these are fraught issues, and I'll never forget that we were helping a group of asylum seekers who were sent to a camp in Mexico. They were being assaulted, kidnapped, terrorized by cartels. We were bringing them in, and it was slow, right? It was a security operation. And I'll never forget that they, even in this camp, like, they set up a system to give themselves haircuts and fresh shaves, a lot of the men, because they wanted to look their best when they entered the United States. And that to me is such, I always think about that, because I wish more Americans knew, like, just how much immigrants
Mm.
love the country and how much they want to, and they do contribute, right? And they want to look their best and be their best for us. And that's, you know, most of us can tie our history back to a naturalized immigrant, unless you were brought here under slavery or you are Native American. And so that is, immigration is one of the most American things about us.
110%. My grandmother, um, she was from Newfoundland. My grandfather was from Italy. My mom is a first generation American. Like, it touches everyone. It's not just the southern border. It's people coming from Canada. It's people coming from Europe. It's all over, and it makes us beautiful. And so many of us would not be here if it wasn't for the beauty of immigration.
That's right. So we have to take it back and make it the patriotic issue it can be. And Democrats have to lead that fight, right? Republicans aren't going back to Ronald Reagan's. This is one of the best things about, you know, his last speech was about immigration, right? He was so aspirational. They're not going back to that. And so Democrats have to show that kind of American leadership. And I hope they do, but I think we have to keep pushing them to.
I didn't know that was his last speech. I'm gonna have to look that up after we end our conversation.
I hope that was exactly, I'm pretty sure it's very famous because it was a lot of Democrats have used it to
Yeah,
try and bring in Republicans back, but once Trump took power, he just ended that legacy in the Republican Party.
it's so disheartening. Well, we've made it to the final question, Andrea. So I'm very curious to know, what is it that you're not wrong about?
I am not wrong that immigration reform will make our country stronger and richer. Like, that it will be one of the biggest economic revitalization actions that, if Congress can get it done, that we will have experienced. And I think the United States can do it. Like, I think we still have that capability. And I say that as someone who has seen the issue get worse for 16
Yeah.
years, but movements are long. And I think, I think more Americans will start to see when their neighbors disappear what that does
Mm.
to every part of their community.
You know, I'm happy that we're ending the conversation on this, because so much of what I've been trying to figure out recently is how to take back what American patriotism looks like, to what you were saying. Like, like, I know that you're not supposed to wear a flag, but, like, I want to wear red, white, and blue clothing. I want to wear my, like, being American, like, loud and proud. but like the associations that MAGA has stolen from what it means to be a patriot, just like I don't want to wear anything that is somewhat patriotic in public for the fear of being a white male in Alabama. People associated me with this hateful ideology. Like I don't want to be
Mhm.
associated with that at all. I want to take back what it means to be patriotic, and if this is something that we can do and talk about and force Democrats to be leaders on. That is like the
Yes.
best. That is the best way we can reclaim what it means to be an American patriot. To celebrate our 250th. I had someone on, Gloria Brown
Mhm.
Marshall, a few months ago, and she was explaining this idea of United States versus America. America is like the Statue of Liberty; it's the promise of freedom, but the United States is like that
Mm.
ugly step sibling that's always like working to try to like take things away from America. And that's how I'm approaching the 4th of July this year, is like, I'm going to celebrate America and that promise and try to be patriotic in that way while still trying to hold the United States accountable. And this conversation is really fueling that fire for me. So thank you for that.
Ah, good. It's inspiring me too, and I wanna think about my own patriotism, which often takes the form of listening to Beyoncé's Cowboy Carter album. But I think, like, what a way to hold the United States to account and create a beautiful tribute to America at the same time. I always go back to that. So,
Well, I cannot wait to take what you've taught me and apply it to my conversations with people here. I cannot wait to release this episode, and I know that the audience will have a lot of takeaways. So Andrea, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your knowledge and expertise with us.
thank you, and you make me wanna visit Alabama, and I've never been, so thank you for
Come
the
on.
inspiration.
Come
I
on.
know, it's time. So, thank you, so fun.